Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are opening the file on a hidden front line, one where the bullets stopped flying, but the psychological war was just getting started. The setting is Okinawa, September 1945. The war is officially over, yet for 32 Japanese women, a mix of civilian conscripts, nurses, teachers, clerks, the real terror was just beginning. These women, surrounded by the conquering enemy in a makeshift American camp near Kadena, believed they were walking toward certain torture and execution. They were steeped in years of imperial propaganda.
Okay, let's unpack this. What happens when the demon you've been conditioned to fear, the enemy you expect to, dissect you, instead treats you with systematic, unwavering dignity? This deep dive is about that collapse.
Listen, you have to grasp the sheer force of the imperial Japanese propaganda machine. This wasn't just messaging.
Yeah.
It was the foundation of their entire wartime civilization. The official playbook for every Japanese citizen, particularly women, was absolute suicide over surrender.
Of course, capture was shame, but more importantly, it was promised death through unimaginable agony. They weren't just told the Americans were cruel. They were shown graphically that the Americans would use them for vivisection and experiments.
So it was incredibly specific, the fear.
Incredibly specific.
Yeah.
So when these 32 women arrived for processing on September 15th, 1945, the crisis was immediate and purely cognitive. Their entire world structure, their whole belief system, relied on the enemy's utter barbarity.
And when that didn't happen?
When the Americans immediately jettisoned that playbook of vengeance and replaced it with clean water, medical care, and food, well, that kindness became the greatest existential threat imaginable. It wasn't gentle. It was a radical, instantaneous collapse of dogma. This was, functionally, an act of ideological warfare executed not with tanks, but with soap and blankets.
Our mission today is to thoroughly examine this invisible front line, focusing on that extraordinary month near Kadena. We are dissecting how the calculated application of dignity caused a transformation far more profound than any bombing campaign could achieve. We want to see, step by step, how propaganda met reality. The initial instruction these women gave each other, whisper down the terrified line, tells you everything you need to know. Close your eyes and don't scream.
That says it all.
Let's start with the terror they brought with them. We can't analyze the response without first understanding the depth of that internalized death sentence. What were they actually expecting to happen in that camp?
Here's the thing. It wasn't a generalized anxiety of being prisoners. It was a certainty of specific ritualized abuse.
Right.
The source material shows they were absolutely convinced the Americans, particularly the doctors, would cut them open for experiments while they were still conscious. The imperial propaganda hadn't just used abstract terms, They disseminated crude, graphic imagery of Japanese prisoners being tortured, dismembered by American personnel.
So they had a mental picture.
A very clear mental picture. A medical checkup was the prelude to mutilation. That was the script. For Michiko, the 23-year-old former telephone operator, the sources note that this anticipation made her feel ancient. She had hidden in caves, watched her neighbors die, and this final stage, capture. It felt like a slow, inevitable march toward that exact scenario.
So survival wasn't even on the table for them. It was about managing how they would die.
Exactly. It was about managing the nature of their ending.
And their preparations for this weren't military. They were deeply personal and fatalistic.
That's right.
Yuki, one of the younger women, she had a razor blade tied to her waist, not for shaving.
No. It was saved for the precise moment the torture began to ensure she retained control over her own death. It was the only way to avoid the prophesied dishonor. The only way out.
And Michiko had a sharp stone hidden in her sleeve.
Yeah, and the plan wasn't to throw it at a guard. It was to use it on herself if the pain became unbearable. A final, desperate act of defiance.
So think about that. You walk into this camp prepared not for interrogation, but for suicide. Your defense strategy is self-destruction.
That's the mindset. That's what they were up against.
So they arrive at this site near Kadena, and the sensory shock must have been immediate. The environment itself was the first major challenge to everything they believed.
It was chaos, but it was mundane chaos.
Yeah.
Listen, they're expecting this grand, sinister torture complex.
Right. Watchtowers, barbed wire, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. And what they got was rows of tents. It smelled of sun-baked canvas and machine oil. There were trucks, cranes, supplies, the inevitable consequence of a massive logistical operation.
Crucially, no visible implements of torture.
None. No execution grounds, no watchtowers, nothing. And that absence of the expected horror was terrifying in its own way.
Because they couldn't calibrate the danger.
Exactly. They just assumed the traps were hidden, that the calm was a facade.
Let's dwell on the sensory dissonance for a moment, because this is where that cognitive collapse really begins. The smells. They were all wrong.
You've got it. The air didn't smell like a slaughterhouse, it smelled like human care. They registered the powerful chemical smell of disinfectant.
Which is for cleaning, not cruelty.
Right. And they smelled soap. And then, the most devastating thing, they smelled food cooking.
What kind of food?
Steamed rice, vegetables, maybe some fish stock. The sources describe the women's stomachs twisting, not just with hunger, and they hadn't eaten properly in months.
With fear.
With absolute fear. Because this abundance, this domesticity, it contradicted every single thing they had been taught. How could a monstrous demon be organized enough to cook proper meals for prisoners?
And the sounds were just as destabilizing.
Oh yeah, they heard American voices, but they weren't shouts. Not violent commands. They were the ordinary tones of working soldiers, the clatter of mess kits, the rumble of supply trucks. It spoke of an industrial capability far beyond what Japan had left.
But there's one sound that really broke through.
The sound of laughter. Genuine, casual laughter coming from the soldiers' area.
And their ideology demanded the Americans be what? Hateful, joyless monsters.
Brutal automata. Exactly. So how could they laugh? How could they possess ordinary human camaraderie? The confusion, the radical lack of fit between expectation and reality. It just short-circuited their psychological defenses.
So Michiko and the others, they're huddled together, terrified, not even asking for water.
No. They clung to the certainty that they'd suffer the same fate as the prisoners from the propaganda. They were bracing for it, delaying accepting any comfort, as if that would make the coming pain worse.
The whole situation was just this ticking clock of anxiety, and it all leads up to September 15th.
The day of the processing. 3 American women arrive, nurses in clean white uniforms. Another point of confusion. The enemy sent their own women to handle them. And as they were led toward this large medical tent, that final desperate plea passed down the line, woman to woman.
Close your eyes and don't scream. It wasn't just about pain, was it? It was about dignity.
It was about dying silently, not giving the enemy the satisfaction of hearing them suffer. They were ready to withdraw their minds before their bodies were violated. They expected the knife, the interrogation, the beginning of the cruelty.
And that absolute certainty was about to be obliterated.
When they enter that tent, the entire conventional expectation of how a conquering army treats prisoners was immediately rewritten.
How so?
This wasn't force. It was the calculated deployment of hygiene. The shock was delivered not with a whip, but with hot water and soap.
So the narrative turning point is right here. Their first stop isn't an examination table.
No, it's a dedicated area for washing. The women were led to large basins with steam rising from them, filled with hot water, and next to them, stacks of real, white, perfumed soap.
And they had to be told what to do.
Lieutenant Morrison, the American nurse, she had to use broken Japanese.
Yeah.
Just pointing, repeating, clean first, then check, clean important. The immediate priority was sanitation and comfort.
You have to imagine the shock of that. These women had spent months in filthy, disease-ridden caves.
Barely had water to drink, let alone wash. And now the enemy is providing the ultimate luxury, unlimited hot water and soap. Within the propaganda context, this made absolutely no sense. Why waste resources on prisoners you're about to torture?
Fumiko, the nurse, she thought the soap might be poisoned.
Of course she did. She couldn't reconcile this gift with the image of the enemy. It was impossible.
And the act of cleansing itself, it becomes this profound psychological experience.
When Michiko dipped her hands into the hot water, she described a physical gasp. It wasn't just pleasant, it was a relief from months of physical stress. The sources describe several women just weeping silently as they scrubbed the grime, the cave dust, the fear from their skin.
And the American nurses are helping them.
With incredible patience, gently demonstrating how to wash their hair. They were treated not as captured enemies, but as patients requiring basic human care.
And then they get new clothes.
Clean, simple cotton dresses and white towels that were sun-dried and soft. Michiko stood there, feeling the fabric. A physical testament to the enemy's unexpected humanity. She wrote in her notes that her mind split in two.
Between what?
The rational, ideological part screaming, "This is a trick. They will hurt us more because we let our guard down." And the physical, exhausted part just accepting the comfort. The physical reality was overwhelming the mental conditioning.
And this was all just the setup for the clinical examination, the part they dreaded most.
Michiko was called first. She walked in, clutching that sharp stone in her sleeve. She was ready.
And she meets Dr. Catherine Chen.
An American woman doctor,
Right.
professional demeanor. And critically, she offered a tired, kind smile. That smile alone violated every expectation of the brutal, joyless monster.
What followed was care, not cruelty.
Pure clinical efficiency. Dr. Chen checked Michiko's eyes, throat, ears. She immediately diagnosed her throat inflammation from breathing cave dust and promised antibiotics.
So she's not looking for weaknesses to exploit, she's looking for things to heal.
Exactly. She used the stethoscope to check her heart and lungs. The entire examination was focused on healing.
The breaking point, though, came when Dr. Chen looked at her hands.
Her hands were covered in infected cuts and scrapes from the caves. Dr. Chen didn't ignore them. She cleaned the wounds with disinfectant, which stung, briefly confirming the idea of pain, but it was pain with a purpose, and then wrapped them professionally in clean white bandages.
And prescribed medicine.
A course of antibiotics and multivitamins. The diagnosis was purely objective. Malnutrition, dehydration, several infections.
The undeniable proof that the propaganda was a lie, it was in those bandages.
She walked in expecting to be cut open. She walked out patched up. And Dr. Chen's final words, translated through Lieutenant Morrison, were the ethical capstone. You've been through hell. You are safe now. No one here will hurt you.
The physical reality, the medicine, the comfort, the care, it was an immediate repudiation of years of conditioning.
When the 32 women gathered afterward, they weren't relieved. They were in a state of paralysis, what the sources call complete bewilderment.
Waiting for the other shoe to drop.
But the pain never came. One woman just stared at her bandaged feet. Ko, the teacher, observed that the doctor had handled her like I was a person, a valid patient.
And this brings us back to Yuki, the one with the razor blade.
The sources indicate she just stood there until her hands stopped shaking. She watched her comrades receiving medicine, and later she discarded the blade. She wrote that she realized, the Americans aren't going to hurt us.
That one sentence, that's the complete collapse of her worldview.
She had prepared for death, but the enemy had insisted on her life.
And then they were taken to their quarters.
A wooden barracks, screen against mosquitoes, rows of cots, mattresses, pillows, folded blankets. Again, comfort and sanitation, not cruelty.
And the door.
The soldier showing them the door, using simple Japanese, stated clearly, no lock.
Nella?
They were not confined. They were simply left alone, too confused and exhausted to fully process the safety. This moment of voluntary non-confinement was a masterstroke of psychological strategy.
Once their physical safety was established, the Americans shifted focus to undermining the economic and moral framework of their ideology.
That's right. This next phase focused on two powerful vectors: sustenance and self-worth. It began immediately with breakfast.
And this wasn't just random food.
No, this was a calculated move demonstrating both respect and overwhelming logistical power. They were brought to the mess hall and served trays, not of key rations, but of steamed white rice, miso soup, pickled vegetables.
They were served Japanese food.
The Americans went out of their way to provide Japanese food. It wasn't just feeding them, it was recognizing their culture.
And for women who had been subsisting on wild plants and insects.
The sight and smell of this actual customized food was paralyzing. Many women cried silently into their bowls. This simple act rice and miso soup hammered home the concept that the enemy was not resource-starved or vengeful, but organized and respectful.
And then came the complete inversion of the prisoner dynamic. Paid work.
Captain Turner explained through Lieutenant Morrison that while they were prisoners, the camp adhered to specific rules. They could work 4 hours a day in the hospital, laundry, or supply depot.
In exchange for what?
Paid wages. In military script, which they could use at the camp canteen to buy soap, thread, other necessities.
Prisoners being paid.
Unheard of. It contradicted the humiliation they expected. It signaled that their labor had value, their time had worth, and that the American system operated on principles of fairness, even for captured enemies.
Fumiko, the former nurse, was assigned to the hospital, and her job was a profound ideological challenge in itself.
Here's the thing. She was assigned to help treat seriously wounded Japanese soldiers,
So she's nursing her own countrymen.
who the Americans were actively keeping alive, performing complex surgery to save men who would have been left to die or encouraged to commit suicide by their own command structure.
That's a masterful strategic decision.
It forced her to collaborate in the ultimate act of kindness, preserving the lives of the soldiers she was taught should have died with honor. It subtly but fundamentally shifted her loyalty from the imperial doctrine of honorable death.
Michiko, because she had some English, was assigned to the supply depot.
Under Sergeant Mitchell. And this placement was strategic. It forced her to confront the staggering material wealth of the enemy firsthand.
Tell us about Sergeant Mitchell. He wasn't a typical guard.
No, not an interrogator, just a logistical NCO who treated Michiko patiently. He asked about her pre-war dreams. She wanted to be a teacher. He even showed her a photograph of his own daughter back in California.
Humanizing the enemy.
Immediately, bridging the gap with shared parental hopes. He was a father, not a monster.
And this is where the economic contrast became crushing.
Michiko spent her days labeling crates and boxes that constantly flowed in. Medical supplies, clean uniforms, boots, and, critically, supplies for Japanese civilians also being aided by the Americans. It was a visible, endless tide of industrial power.
The sources mention a very specific moment that crystallized this, a shipment of treats.
Yes, a massive shipment arrives, and within it, hundreds of shiny, paper-wrapped chocolate bars explicitly labeled as treats for American soldiers.
Simple, unnecessary luxury.
She had just seen her country reduced to ashes, her family starving, and here was the enemy. With so much extra wealth, they could afford to distribute high-calorie, pure luxury items as casual amenities.
She actually confronted him about it, didn't she?
She did. She asked him why America was so rich. And his response was simple, yet devastating. He was careful with his words. He explained America was lucky. The war hadn't touched the mainland. Factories kept running. Farms kept producing.
No divine superiority, just geography and infrastructure.
And he admitted, with a quiet humility that must have shocked her, war never is fair. That unfairness, that stark material contrast, it was a constant, tangible pressure against the doctrine of divine superiority.
But all this comfort and safety led to the most crushing internal conflict of all, the guilt of survival.
This wasn't something the Americans imposed. This was a self-inflicted wound.
When did that hit?
It hit hard when the Red Cross mail finally filtered through. Michiko got a letter from her mother. The news was devastating. Her father was dead, her brother missing, her mother was barely surviving on sweet potatoes.
And Michiko is safe, fed, earning money.
Here was the crash. She's safe, fully fed, sleeping on a cot, buying soap with enemy money, while her family is enduring famine and monumental loss. The gap was morally unsustainable. She was surviving on the enemy's dime.
And the social condemnation followed quickly.
Sato, another woman, shared a message from her mother-in-law. The judgment was harsh. She should have died with honor rather than be captured.
So the cultural shame was overwhelming.
Their deepest betrayal wasn't the fact of capture, but their acceptance of the enemy's comfort. Their safety was a betrayal of the dead.
Let's cut right to the strategic heart of this. This was not random good behavior. This was a consistent, systematic demonstration of shared humanity.
Meticulously designed to crack the concrete shell of imperial ideology. It targeted the personal, the emotional, and the philosophical.
The exchange with Sergeant Mitchell and the chocolate bar is a perfect example.
Precisely. Mitchell was keenly aware of the famine in Japan. He reached into his personal rations and gave Michiko a chocolate bar. But the instruction was the key.
What was the instruction?
She was to send it to her starving mother with the specific note, tell her an American soldier wanted her to have it. This wasn't about nutrition. It was about planting a seed of doubt, a direct, personal act of charity crossing enemy lines.
Tangible evidence that the propaganda was a lie.
A tangible piece of evidence. And then there's the music. An American soldier played a Japanese folk song, an old melody about cherry blossoms in spring.
So they're hearing a piece of their pre-war soul coming from the enemy's radio.
And they gather, listening and crying. The music connected them to a version of Japan that existed before the military machine seized control. He allowed them a moment of profound, shared nostalgia, shattering the concept that the two cultures were fundamentally incompatible.
These gestures were only effective because they were reinforced by a clear, articulated ethical framework.
This is where the doctors became ideological agents. Fumiko, in the hospital, observed that the American doctors operated on a principle of universal compassion. The source notes a Buddhism-Christianity connection.
What did that mean in practical terms?
It means choosing not to inflict suffering, adhering to the sanctity of life, even when they had the power and every reason to deny care to the enemy.
That choice not to inflict suffering even on soldiers who had tried to commit suicide, that was the ultimate repudiation of the Japanese focus on honorable death.
Absolutely. Dr. Chen's ethos was simple but brutally effective. Pain doesn't care about nationality. Suffering doesn't care about what flag you fought under. The focus was entirely on the universal human condition.
But the strategy wasn't just medical, it was philosophical.
Here's the thing. Sergeant Mitchell brought the political dimension to the forefront. He gave Michiko a crash course in Western political philosophy.
How?
He read her excerpts from the American founding documents, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. He explained the foundational ideal. All men are created equal. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Showing her that their actions weren't random.
That they flowed from a foundational political text that guaranteed individual rights. This was the absolute philosophical opposite of Japan's ideology of divine imperial superiority, which demanded subservience and sacrifice. The American actions in the camp were a live, practical demonstration of those founding ideals.
This relentless, systematic kindness, though, it forced an intense internal battle among the women themselves.
It wasn't a fight against the Americans. It was a fight between the older women who clung to the dogma and the younger women who were slowly accepting reality.
The internal debate was existential.
The older women, like Mrs. Yamada, they insisted it had to be a trick, a psychological move to soften them up. She feared they would betray Japan by forgetting who we are, just by accepting help. If the Americans were kind, then the sacrifices of millions of Japanese were meaningless, based on a lie.
But the younger women started to shift. Yuki, the one with the razor blade.
She offered the radical counter-argument. Maybe I found my human spirit. What she was realizing was that their own ideology was based on reducing their enemies to monsters to justify their own atrocities, whereas the Americans saw them as people.
They had been saved not because they were special, but because they were human beings who needed help.
And Michiko, documenting everything, she eventually synthesized this. It's perhaps the most important finding in the sources.
What did she write?
The cruelest thing they could do is kill us. But the most powerful thing, the most devastating thing, is to show us kindness.
Kindness was the ultimate weapon.
Because it forced them to drop the framework of hatred and see the enemy as human. The Americans won the military war with superior logistics, but they were winning the internal ideological war with soap, food, and the Declaration of Independence.
This intense psychological transformation led directly to a very real, high-stakes decision.
Around the middle of October, Captain Turner gathered the women and offered them a choice.
Stay in Okinawa for voluntary, fair-wage reconstruction work, or be immediately repatriated home to Japan, a choice that demanded they confront their moral guilt.
The emotional weight was immense. Mrs. Yamada immediately chose repatriation, duty, the familiar shame of defeat. But the younger women were agonizing. Yuki feared the chaos and famine at home. Ko worried her own family would reject her.
Fumiko, the nurse, made the choice to stay.
She accepted voluntary work at the hospital. She felt a responsibility to bridge the gap and help the wounded. Her mission became about living in that new reality of cooperation.
Michiko, however, chose the harder path. Repatriation. Why?
She understood the critical importance of what she had witnessed. She looked at her notebook, now filled with a month's worth of meticulous documentation, and realized the truth needed a messenger. She said it clearly. If we all stay here, who will tell the people in Japan the truth?
She chose the difficult, dangerous path of the witness,
knowing the judgment that awaited her.
Before she left, Michiko sought out Dr. Chen for one last interaction.
It was brief, but potent. Michiko asked her in careful practiced English, "Why you help us?" It was the question that summarized her entire month of bewilderment.
And Dr. Chen's reply?
It stripped away all nationalism and politics. She just said, "Because you needed help. That's enough reason." The focus was purely on universal human necessity.
And Sergeant Mitchell, he understood the ideological battle Michiko was about to fight back home. He gave her a final gift.
A new blank notebook and 3 pencils. And his instruction was a warning and a command. Keep writing. Write the truth. People need to hear it.
He knew what she was facing.
Listen, he knew the price of carrying that truth. He warned her people would call her a traitor for speaking well of the Americans, but that her experience was paramount to the future. He sent her off armed with nothing but paper and the memory of kindness.
The journey back to Japan, it showed her the full scope of the devastation.
Far worse than the propaganda had ever detailed. The ports were rubble. The American occupation force was distributing aid food, medicine managing a catastrophic humanitarian crisis.
And when she finally found her mother, the confrontation was immediate.
Her mother, starving and heartbroken, was relieved at first. But that relief quickly turned to resentment when she saw the items Michiko carried. The quality soap, the unused medicines, the chocolate, all symbols of the enemy's comfort.
And her mother said what Mitchell had predicted.
Exactly. You should have died with honor rather than be captured. That's what a Japanese woman should do. The dogma died hard.
Michiko's reply, though, was her first public declaration of the truth she carried.
She stood firm. The Americans didn't give us a chance to die, Mother. They just kept saving us. Everything we were told about them was a lie. She chose the truth of her survival over the demanded honor of suicide.
The hardest part for her, she said later, wasn't the physical suffering of the war.
No. It was trying to explain the nature of that American kindness to people who desperately needed to believe that the war, the suffering, and the sacrifice of their loved ones had been noble and necessary against a monstrous foe. Her truth threatened the coping mechanism of a defeated nation.
And yet she kept writing.
Filled notebook after notebook with the details of the camp.
Michiko eventually became a teacher.
Fulfilled her pre-war dream. And she taught history not by glorifying defeat, but by weaving her personal experience into the curriculum. She showed students that the future of Japan could be built on dignity and rights, the very concepts demonstrated by her captors.
She used her trauma and her unexpected survival to educate the next generation.
Her ultimate purpose was cemented. She was the witness. She told her own daughter later that the hardest lesson of her life was admitting that everything she was taught was fundamentally wrong.
This story provides an extraordinary counter-narrative to traditional military history. The Americans didn't just win the battlefield, they strategically won the hearts and minds of their enemy.
It was the strategic genius of restraint and respect. The entire administration of the camp, the hot water, the fair wages, the gentle checkups, the food, these were not merely comforts. They were tangible, undeniable evidence that shattered the foundations of imperial belief.
A demonstration of power through mercy.
Exactly. And it led to an internal redemption for the survivors, who became the most effective living witnesses against their own national propaganda.
The women were initially told in their darkest hour, "Close your eyes and don't scream," as a final plea against the expected horror.
But Michiko realized the truth was the exact opposite.
They should have been told to open their eyes and see clearly the humanity they had been taught to deny.
Which leaves you with a critical thought for today. What uncomfortable truths are we avoiding in our own lives or in our current political climate, simply because accepting them means admitting that something fundamental we were taught was wrong?
What beliefs are we defending that might instantly collapse under the simple, relentless pressure of objective, unwavering human kindness and dignity?
Sometimes the most powerful and devastating weapon against prejudice is simply the relentless, systematic insistence on seeing the humanity in the person standing across from you.